if there are any questions.
No questions, but a comment. After this all occurred, I went out and spent some time, as I like to do, one of my sayings is, good artists create, great artists steal. So I went out and looked at other towns that have implemented mixed-use ordinances, and I was amazed at how you could tell on a town-by-town basis, they approached it and they put into details what they wanted their town to look like. There are some out there that say specifically, here's the kinds of businesses we want, here's the dimensions, here's what we care about parking, here's what we care about paint color. There's one that had pages of, here are the kinds of businesses that we absolutely will not allow, or not allowed. And they listed, everything from adult bookstores to you name it. They had them, so they get very detailed, so it becomes pretty clear when you look at it, we kind of see what's going on. And they also have a clause in there, and they say, or any other business that would be deemed to not fit in the character of the town as determined by the planning board. So they kind of say, we thought of all of the things that we want, all of the things that we don't want, but just in case you think there's a gray area, it's the planning board that will be the arbiter of things that might have slipped between the cracks. They've thought about, based on a concept, there's a couple that have mixed-use districts, they literally named them 1, 2, and 3, where they thought of 3 different areas of town, and they kind of said, here's the general thing, and for this area, they went into specifics. So the point in all of this is that these ordinances are pretty descriptive and pretty prescriptive on what the people of the town got together and thought. We know that progress moves on. We know that our town needs to change and grow. And they kind of thought about, rather than having it be growth by default or growth by, they kind of said, let's kind of figure out where we want it to go. They spent a lot of detail, a lot of time, putting more stuff in, even in, when you gave your little overview when we set up the placards and had the named fire station, I was surprised at the level of detail that goes into these ordinances.
And just to address that, when we did the survey before, we listed, at a high level, different kinds of business, and we asked them, do you like this kind of business or that kind of, yes or no, would you like this kind of business to move into the area? And so we got very positive responses for certain things, very negative responses for other things, and mixed, in between. But you got a very clear idea of what people, the residents of that area would like to see in their neighborhood now that they've got the sidewalks and they've got more sidewalks coming in, versus what they absolutely do not want to agree. And you can absolutely put that in. And that's kind of the idea here, is that we could write it according to however the people want it to be written. And if they reject the whole thing, that's fine too, as long as a decision is made. But also in the survey, we specifically broke up the neighborhood into 3 different chunks, because we do consider them to be 3 separate neighborhoods, and we got slightly different responses for each one. And so that's certainly something, to look at going forward too, is that we may do 3 different zones, or it may be that it's only in part of that area and not other parts, depending on people's desires. But again, the important thing is to have a concrete proposal and let the people who are in those neighborhoods be able to express their thoughts through a neutrally worded survey and through the public meetings, 5 of which are included in the grant.
Can I ask a question? Once it's made into an ordinance, what exactly does that mean? It goes to the planning board?
Well, the planning board makes, once you have a draft ordinance and you've gone through this, you've had, your 5 different public meetings for it, and you've had all of your public input, and you've massaged it. It goes to the planning board then. The planning board then looks at all of the input from the public, and they make a decision whether to go forward with it or not. If they go forward with it, they can make whatever changes to it that they want. It's just a suggestion. But they would make those changes based on the public input. And the final step is, if the planning board, if there's sufficient public input, the planning board decides to move forward with it. and they've got something, you know, and the lawyers have looked at it and everybody's in agreement, then finally it goes on the town ballot, and the whole town would vote on it.
And there are public hearings along the way held by the.
Yes, also the planning board has to have their own public hearing as well, before something goes onto the ballot as well. And certainly the selectmen can also have hearings on it as well. And, you know, that's a basic process, but there's a lot that you can do with this. And one of the suggestions that I wanted to make here is, if you decide to accept the grant, you know, I would also suggest rechartering the committee, but rewriting the charter to address some of the concerns that have been expressed here. And I think you can do that with the charter mechanism by having some agreement between the planning board, the selectmen, and people involved in that. For example, you can create a bigger role for the selectmen, you know, in this process. You can specify what sort of level of support you would like from the neighborhood, from it to provide, you know, have some agreement with the planning board on what constitutes, you know, support from the residents of the neighborhood or whatnot. There's a lot of things that you can negotiate up front, and it can be put in the charter.
Melanie?
Brian, if I may ask a question. You've mentioned the word grant. Can you say what, and I guess that's the focus of this meeting, what is the grant going to bring us?
Right, the grant is for $21,000, which the town also has to match with $1,000 of actual cash, as well as many hours, you know, a certain number of hours of volunteer time, which is pretty easy for the town to do. But what the grant does is it allows us to hire a professional planner, somebody who has actually written mixed-use ordinances before for the other towns around here, and they've seen, you know, the effects of them over the years, and somebody who's got, you know, actual training in this and can provide us with the language and also suggestions. But again, the town always makes the final decision about any wording about it. So the professional is just there as for help and for advice.
So this is really more research,
Yes.
trying to nail down some things and come up with good suggestions and take all the
Yes.
information thus far
And also,
collect it.
and also because they have the,
Can we have your name for the record?
Robert Tonneberger.
Thank you.
and also because they have that experience, they can also warn us about things that they've seen in other towns. It's like, you know, we did this, we thought this was a good idea, it turned out to have problems, you should be aware of this stuff. So it's helpful to have that kind of feedback as well. But again, part of this is really to address the concerns that we heard from the residents, that they're concerned about having a bunch of people write this ordinance who have never done this before, and the problems that could result from that.
Melanie?
Yes, Melanie LeVay, 2 McDaniels Drive. I just wanted to speak from the perspective of a volunteer. I'm sure, like many of you, you sit on quite a few different committees. I've been on the master plan with some of you folks, the visioning committee, economic development, and now we're on another economic development committee. So I heard in the last meeting where this was killed, so to speak, that the planning board is working on this, the economic development committee can work on this as well. None of those committees have put in the work, the time, the effort, and applied for a grant. We are nowhere near where the mixed use committee is. We're all talking about the vision of Brookline, its growth. And this is an important piece, what it could look like. It's not saying that we have to go with it. And it's also giving each and every one of you an opportunity to say what you want it to be or what you don't want it to be. And the alternative is to let somebody else come in and say, well, I'm gonna buy this building and I'm gonna turn it into whatever. Maybe in 5-10 years, when there's a different board of selectmen, maybe they'll let a big grocery store or something that we don't really want in there. So this is our opportunity to make it what we want it to be. So I would urge you to reconsider, and I thank your committee for the thoughtful work that you did.
Boris?
I'd like to understand, ordinance is one thing and zoning is another thing. And the ordinances are going to apply to zones, or how does the zoning, because we have commercial zoning and then we have residential zoning. So is that gonna change, or the ordinance is just gonna sit on top of existing zoning?
Would you like to address it, Peter, or actually, I'm sorry, one thing I forgot, I had intended to say from the very beginning, and I forgot, is when the selectmen appointed, the various people onto the committee, there were two of us who were chosen by the members of the committee to be the co-chairs, myself and Sarah Marchant. Sarah at the time was the town planner for the city of Milford. She's now the town planner for Amherst as well.
I'm just trying to understand, I'm a little
Yes.
confused
Yes.
about that issue.
So we'll hear from an expert.
Yeah. It's a little scary. It's basically up to how you want the ordinance to be written. It could literally create a new zones, so it would be a mixed-use zone that would be instead of the residential or the commercial zone, or it can be created as an overlay district, which would lay on top and take precedence over it when there's a conflict. So for example, if it's an overlay zone and it says that you can have a yoga studio on your property, residential zone says you can't, this use would trump the residential zone's use, it's an overlay on top of it.
That's what I kind of thought. So the fallout would then be, of course, now we've got essentially commercial businesses inside of residential areas, which then create potential issues, which of course would have to be addressed, such as parking and traffic and,
Lighting.
Lighting, signs,
Yeah, all kinds of-
noise,
right.
and most of those
it
things
gets
are.
complicated quick.
It does, and all of these kind of ordinances in general, written across the state, are mixed use, are designed in residential areas that then have to deal with these things. And so communities come up with their own unique ways to deal with it and what works best for them.
So just one more follow-up, so understand that. Now then, today we have a planning board which mitigates all these issues for us today. So what this proposal is that we have a plan written which then essentially which alleviates the planning board from having to make a lot of decisions, if you will, somewhat randomly, depending upon the composure of that committee at the time and what else is going on.
I think what, in